Hi everyone, I'm Christina. Welcome back to my channel. If you have been here before, you know that I am a huge fan of Jolie paint. It has been one of my go-tos for so many projects throughout the years, and I'm coming to you with some bittersweet news today that after so many years on the market, Jolie is going to be shutting down business in May. But as it often is with sad news, there's also a silver lining, and that is that they are offering what they have left in stock at a really great discount for you guys. So try to get your hands on that while it is still available. So to give you some inspiration and just look back on all the Jolie projects that I've done, I'm going to be touching on some of my favorites today, giving you an update of where they are today, what I think of these projects now, and I'm also going to give you some alternatives to other paints that you can use and other products in case they are sold out of that color. The first thing I'm doing is grabbing my Surf Prep Electric Ray, and I have a 80 grit screen sanding abrasive, and I'm going to strip all this varnish off the top, and I'm going to do that on the bottom as well. I want to have a natural look on top and on that bottom of that console shelf. My original plan was to sand these sides too, but that veneer was way too thin, so I'm going to change track on that and just paint around the edge. But in the meantime, I'm taking a 120 sandpaper and I'm just smoothing out both of my surfaces that I stripped down to bare wood. This 120 is smoothing my surface out, and it's also preparing it for the paint wash I'm going to use to create a faux stain. I'm going to be painting the whole color in Uptown Ecru, which is Jolie's color of the year. It is a light beige, it's very beautiful and warm, and it's going to go with pretty much any color that you might have in your home. So if you've been here before, you probably know what I'm doing. I am creating a paint wash to act as a stain on those portions that I strip down. When I do this, I just mix 50% paint, 50% water, and I like to apply my washes with a natural bristle brush. So I've grabbed my large Jolie brush because this is going to get the job done quickly. I like to put down a slip coat of water first before I do my paint stain. So I'm grabbing my paint wash and spreading that all over my surface. When you're working with a small surface like this, I find that it's easiest to just do the whole thing and then come back and wipe off the excess. I like to go with the grain when I can, and this top was kind of funky. It had patterns going in every direction, so I'm just following the grain of wood for each section I'm working on. The longer you let this set, the darker it's going to get. I wanted this to be pretty light, so I wiped it back right away. As my rag gets loaded up with paint, I just grab a fresh one so it will absorb the excess paint. This turned out so pretty, and it gets even prettier when I put wax on it later. You guys are not going to believe it. I'm going to repeat that same process on this bottom shelf. This veneer was a lot thinner and I kept blowing through it with my sander. So I kind of left some of that residual stain on there. So you will see a few dark marks on the outside of this piece compared to the top, but I like the character that it adds. I'm finally ready to paint my base. Okay, I'm grabbing my smaller signature brush. This is a natural bristle brush. And then I'm grabbing that same color, that Uptown Ecru, and I'm going to do a basic finish here where I'm going to paint in every direction. This brush picks up a lot more paint than a synthetic brush. It's going to give you some brush strokes, but I'm not going crazy with texture here, but I definitely want there to be a difference between the top portion and my body. Since I'm painting all one color and it's going to be monochromatic, I want to have those different textures in there to bring an interest. Since this is a really light color, I did have to come back in and do a third coat, and I did grab my artist brushes to get some of these hard to reach places on these legs, and then did an entire coat again, a third full coat all on this piece. I pulled up my tape as soon as I was done with that third coat. I find this gives me a crisp line. You just need to be really careful when your paint is wet and the paint on your tape is wet to just pull it up really easily. And then I went back in and touched up any spots that needed it with my little artist brush. I'm going to be sealing it in Jolie's clear wax today. Waxing really isn't that hard. You just need to get a little bit on your brush and rub it into your paint. I always use the analogy of think of it as hand lotion. You don't want your lotion just sitting on top of your hands. You really want it worked into your skin. Once I get a good section coated with wax, I'll come back in with another one of those lint-free cloths that I showed you earlier that I used to absorb my paint. And I'm just going to wipe away any excess, pick out any lint that I see. On a piece like this, you're going to see black lint. So I just flick that out with my finger and wipe away any excess wax. I really loved the color of this top, and then I added the wax and it just took it to a whole nother level, just adding some more depth and richness to it, but it still had the same tone, so it gave me that monochromatic look I was going for. And if you watch my laundry room makeover, you might recognize these. I love these so much. These brushed brass, that is so hard to say, brushed brass knobs from Home Depot. So I got them for this as well. So just to remind you, here is that $30 table I started out with, and here it is now. I styled it up and put it in my entryway as where an entryway table should be, and I bought lots of cute things from Target to style it up. My favorite part about this whole thing, I think, is the top. This color just turned out beautiful. Stayed in my entryway for a really long time, and the only reason I have something else there right now is because I did another project and I was like, oh, I just want to switch it up for a little bit. But I love this entryway table so much. I did not sell it and I did not donate it. It is in my attic because I think, now watching this video, I'm ready to bring it back and put that back down in my entryway because I love it so much. I just love how it turned out. I love the color, and the paint on this one just really transformed it. There's lots of dings and scratches. So my inspiration for this are those Ballard Design Pottery Barn Restoration Hardware beds that you see that are a beautiful neutral color with that cane feature, but I definitely don't want that $1,500, $2,000 price tag, so we're gonna do a dupe today. To get this started, I'm gonna clean my piece like I always do. I've grabbed some Dawn dish soap, that's a grease cutting soap, and some warm water, and I'm just gonna scrub and get all the dust and dirt off of this. It's a really shiny surface, so I'm just gonna kick back a little bit of that finish so my paint has something to stick to. I pulled out my color mixing guide to create a custom color for this piece, and I ended up picking a beige that was 1 part farmhouse beige and 4 parts pure white. I'm going to use my large signature brush, which is a natural bristle brush, to paint this on, and I'm doing the classic style, which is painting in every direction. This is going to give me just a little bit of texture, nothing crazy, nothing rustic, but it is going to lend itself really well to all those little nicks and dings that I had, because it's still going to look hand painted and not furniture, you know, dipped from a factory. Okay, this color is looking really good on camera, but in person it almost looked white, and that was not what I was wanting. I wanted a wood toned color. So this time on my second coat, after that first one dried, I just am doing farmhouse beige straight. No mixing it, no cutting it with that pure white. And I'm adding a little bit of water because I like my second coat to flow a little bit more, but I'm painting it on in the same style, just in every direction with that classic finish. Got a roll of this decorative cane. It's a lot more flexible, and it's actually meant to be used for decorative things like headboards and other furniture that you're not actually going to sit on. It doesn't have to be strong enough for you to sit on it. So I thought this was going to be a better option. Plus it's cheaper. Figured out where I needed to snip it and then trimmed it down to size. I decided I wanted to go monochromatic. So I pulled my cane back down and I did a wash with the farmhouse beige. So I'm ready to attach it. And I find that it's better to attach it when it's wet like this. This decorative cane, you don't have to soak like regular cane, but having it wet helped me pull it taut a little bit and helped get those wrinkles out. I'm using a pneumatic staple gun because we have one. You definitely don't have to have one of those. You can just use a regular staple gun, or you can use an electric one. And if you can enlist the help of someone, I had my husband come out and help me pull it taut while I stapled it. And if you have someone that can do that, great. If you don't, just kind of pull it as you go with your other hand. So this is as close as I could get the staple to my actual border. I was thinking I was originally going to cover these up with some wood spline that I bought, but it did not cover them up. So plan B was to paint them. So I grabbed some of my artist brushes that have these really tiny detailed brushes, grabbed some of my farmhouse beige, and just painted over top of the staples to camouflage them. I'm going to be using their finishing wax and clear to seal my piece. This is the same technique that I used to seal my bed, and it is holding up very well. I'm using the large wax brush to put this on, but you could also use a lint-free rag to apply it if you don't have a wax brush. Once I get a section done like this, I'll grab a shop towel like this or a lint-free cloth, and I just wipe away any excess wax that may be sitting on my piece. Wax does take 30 days to cure down completely, so I told my friend no scrubbing or cleaning this for 30 days, but you can still use the bed. You just need to be gentle with it. So after I let it set overnight, I'm just adding the new bedding. So just to remind you, here is what we started off with, and here is our new modern classic sleigh bed, complete with cane feature. I can't believe how amazing this turned out, you guys. The staples are completely hidden. It's just so much brighter in here. I think this is totally beginner friendly. Am I crazy? Let me know in the comments if you'd be brave enough to tackle this. It still stands up for me today. It's not farmhousey. I think it's a really traditional piece. I love adding the texture of the cane webbing on there. Love, love, love this color. My friend is still using this bed today, and I love that we could update it and give her a fresh look in her room, but still keep a piece that was very sentimental to her. For this lingerie chest today, I got this off of Facebook Marketplace with 2 other pieces for $100. You may remember I redid the nightstand that goes with this set a couple of weeks back. This is from World Market. It's really dark, so I'm going to lighten it up today. And this is my inspiration here. This is the Enchantment dresser from Anthropologie. I am going to start on my drawers, so I'm grabbing my Jolie paint in Farmhouse Beige, and I am making a wash to stain these drawers. I'm going to wipe back any dust I created when I was sanding, and then I'm just going to grab my Zebra Palm Pro to apply this, and I'm going to apply my water paint mix to the entire drawer, coat it completely, and then I will come in with a absorbent cloth and wipe back any excess, and it's going to leave me with a beautiful light bleached wood look. I'm just painting this on full strength, so this is not a wash. As you can see, I did not strip the rest of the body down because that's just going to take too long, and I kind of had already done that before, so I wanted this to have a monochromatic look, but I wanted a full coverage around the base and then have the drawers have that beautiful wash. I let that first coat dry for a couple of hours, and then I came back in and applied all my handles to my drawers, and then I flipped my base on its back so that I could put the drawers back in, and I think this is going to be the easiest way to put the molds on so that they don't fall off and that the glue sticks really well. You can use other mediums with these molds. I just thought this was going to be the easiest one for me. So you mix equal parts of solution A and B, stir them up really well, and then you're going to slowly pour them into the molds. The key is to pour slowly like this so you don't overfill your molds and they don't spill over onto each other and then they get like a rounded back. You want to just fill them up just to the tip top of the actual mold. That will definitely help you down the road. Okay, now here's the super fun part. These harden in 10 minutes and turn white. So how cool is this time lapse? It's like a science experiment. They're really easy to pull out too. You just pull the mold back and they pop right out. So I'm using this Tight Bond Quick and Thick glue. You can actually use it on vertical surfaces, but I did lay this down flat because I thought it would be easier for a newbie. And I'm just using a chip brush to spread out my glue. And as my brush kind of dried up, I would just grab a new one. These are 99 cents. So that was the easiest way for me to spread my glue. And like I said, I just kind of kept putting pieces down and seeing how they worked. And then I would wipe back the glue as much as I could, but you don't have to worry too much about that because this glue is paintable, so you can cover up most of it. Like I mentioned, it's definitely easier to work with these fresh out of the mold when they're really pliable like this, especially when you have to go over drawers, and I ended up cutting the pieces to go across the drawers. They were really easy to cut with scissors when they're not completely hardened yet. Also used some tape to tape down like little sections that were sticking up. I bent one of the vines around the side, so that definitely needed to be taped down while the glue dried to get it to stick. So I didn't have to use tape in all the areas, but any area that was sticking up, I kind of taped that down to make sure that the glue was drying really nicely. Getting paint on here, but then I'm removing a lot of that paint with a paper towel, so I hardly have any paint on here. And I'm just dry brushing these areas. It's going to get in the details and stuff, but I'm not going to have huge globs of paint. I thought it would be better just to kind of build this up slowly instead of making a huge mess. So I'm going to be sealing this in the Jolie finishing wax in clear and using one of their wax brushes to apply it. This is going to give me a protective finish, but is going to be completely matte when it dries down. It's a really natural finish. is one of the main reasons that I chose wax to seal this piece. Well, I love wax because it's such a natural finish and I thought it was perfect for this piece, but if I would have gone and tried to clear coat on here, that would have just made me nervous that it was gonna glob and run and get drips and then have like yellow drip marks in there. I just couldn't take that. So for this particular application, I just thought wax was gonna work better. Just to remind you, here's what I started off with, and here is my piece now. Oh my goodness, I am in love. I think she's so pretty. I know I can't keep her. It's gonna be really hard to let go of her. But mostly I'm just proud for trying something that I was scared of, you guys. Oh my gosh, this project will always hold such a special place in my heart. It is one of the projects that made me kind of take off on Instagram and TikTok and gave me, you know, the opportunity to continue doing this, creating content full time. And it was just such a personal struggle for me. It was something so outside of the box for me. And I think it really inspired a lot of my furniture flips down the road. I kept this in my house for a really long time. And then I ended up donating it to a fundraising auction at my son's school. And so I don't know who has it. It didn't sell for very much, but it went to a good cause. And I got to keep it in my house and just enjoy it and the whole process of it for a whole year. So I miss this one a lot. First thing I'm doing is removing all the hardware, and I'm actually going to update this with a little bit of spray paint. So I'm just taking everything off and setting it aside for later. Just going to clean off my piece with a little bit of mild soap and water and give it a good rinse and let it dry before I start painting. So I'm gonna go ahead and make 16 ounces of my paint. So I'm gonna do 8 of Noir and 8 of Gentleman's Blue. So don't skip on this stirring step because you really wanna make sure that these paints are incorporated and mixed up really well. I'm grabbing my Jolie signature brush, the large one, to paint this piece. Don't be too picky with this first layer of paint. This is just your base. You're still gonna have a lot of wood or the finish showing through from what you're painting over. Most important thing to do on this coat is just to make it as even as possible. If you're not going for a textured look, you just don't want any big drip marks or globs. I always like to take my drawers out to paint typically just because it's easier to paint a flat surface like this. You're gonna get less drip marks this way. So it only takes about 20 minutes for that first coat to dry, so I am hopping over to my hardware to prep it for spray painting. So I'm just roughing it up with a little bit of medium grit sandpaper. This is a 150. And then I'm cleaning all of that dust and residue off and making sure there's no grime or dirt on these and then drying them off. I am using a favorite of mine, the Rust-Oleum Metallic Universal Paint and Primer in One. I've used this on a lot of hardware. It's one of my favorite things to use because it has a metallic finish and it's just a quick and easy way to update hardware, and it actually saves you money because this can only cost about $8 to transform your hardware. And on the second coat, I am going to try to make all my brush strokes go the same way because I'm trying to smooth this out a little bit. Typically let my piece dry for about 2 hours before I put my top coat on. I'm going to be using the Jolie finishing wax in clear today, and I'm going to be applying that with their pointed wax brush. So I have just gotten some wax on my brush and I am just working it into the piece. I like to work in small sections that are about 2 or 3 feet. So I'll do this whole drawer with wax and then I will go back and wipe it down with my cloth. And I wipe back my wax. I am just using a light to medium pressure just to make sure that I have an even finish across the section that I just waxed. I usually let my pieces set overnight after I wax them. So I have let this sit overnight and now I'm adding the hardware back on that I spray painted. I did do 2 coats on this, so just follow the instructions on the can. It's really easy. Here is what we started out with, and here is what the completed piece looks like. I really love how this color turned out. It's super unique and the color mixing guide made it really easy to achieve this look. I don't have an update for you on this navy dresser. It was a custom order for one of my friends and she let me do whatever I want to it, which was I was so grateful. When I went full time on my channel, she was one of the first people that was like, hey, you can do whatever you want and put this on your channel. So I really appreciate her. I appreciate this project. I definitely would not seal a dresser in wax today. Now that I've done so many more furniture flips, I definitely would have put a more protective top coat on there for her, but that was kind of where my wheelhouse was back in the day. I just sealed everything with wax. So that was probably the only thing that I would do differently today on that one. This is her grandma's table. It's very sentimental to her, but she does not like the style of it. So we are going to be removing the glass inlay, taking all this framework out and creating planking on it. My husband created a guide and then he used his circular saw. I wanted diagonals on these big squares, so they had to cut the boards down to size, mark where to cut them, and then use the miter saw to make the angled cuts. Once they got everything in place, they took a mallet and a 2x4 and just hammered everything down in. Now that the build is done, I'm just going to fill all the gaps in the planks with this wood filler that is stainable. I really like this one because it matches this wood really closely, and I know the paint's going to absorb in the same way when I go to stain it. So I'm just filling all those cracks around the table, and if there are any big gaps in the planks, I filled those too. Since some of these gaps were really large, I let this dry overnight before I sanded it. I'm using my Festool Rotex 90 with my dust extractor so that we're not getting dust all over Maggie's house. I'm using it in orbital mode with a 120 grit sandpaper, and after I clean up all this wood filler, I'm gonna go and sand all the planks so that they're nice and smooth and ready to absorb my faux paint stain that I'm gonna do. So I'm taking this beautiful natural beigey color, and I'm going to add 1 part water, 1 part paint, and mix it up really well, and this is going to make a really watery solution that I'm going to use as a faux stain. To do the wash, I'm going to take the same brush, load it up with my paint mixture that I have, and just brush these on in the direction of the boards, in the direction of the grain, and make sure I'm getting it into all the cracks and crevices as well as the wood filler. Once I get all the paint on the section I'm working on, I grab a lint-free cloth that is very absorbent, put on some gloves, and wipe it back and forth in the direction of the grain to remove any excess paint that hasn't absorbed into the boards. I'm not worried about getting that excess paint on my frame right now because I am going to be painting that white, so it's just going to give me a good base for that. Grab my Jolie sanding pads. The light gray one is the fine one, which is around a 220 grit, and I'm going to lightly scuff my surface because my frame is very, very shiny. It had a really thick varnish and coating on it, and if you have a slick surface like that, your paint is not going to adhere well because it doesn't have anything to grip onto. So just giving it a light scuff sand like this is going to prepare the surface for the paint to stick. I'm going to be painting my base white, but I'm actually going to put down a base color first. This is Uptown Ecru, and it is a very light beige, and this is just going to help me not have to do coat upon coat of white. I'm going to be going for a smooth finish, so I am going to water my paint down by about 10%, and I like to mix it up in a separate container like this, and this is about the consistency that I want. I'm going to use my Jolie synthetic brush and a mister to help keep my paint really smooth. When I'm going for a smooth look, I like to just keep my brush strokes going in the same direction and watch out for those drip marks. This paint takes about an hour to dry, so once my first coat was done and dry, I came in with that fine sanding pad again just to smooth out my surface. This is very light pressure here just to smooth out and get rid of some of those brush strokes. I wanted crisp definition between my second coat and my natural wood toned planks here, so I'm just taking some delicate painter's tape by Frog Tape. I like this version because I know it's not going to mess with the paint that I adhere to my board since it's freshly painted. So for the next coat, I am going to be using the gesso white. That's going to be our color of the frame. I have watered this down the same way I did on my first coat. I love this white because it's a really neutral white. It's going to go with cool tones and warm tones, so you really can't go wrong with this one. Once I was done with my third coat, I pulled my tape up immediately. I find you get a crisper line when you pull it up off of wet paint. I let this dry overnight, and then I'm going to come back in and sand down my boards with a 400 grit sandpaper just to make sure they're smooth before I apply the varnish. I'm not going to sand the painted portion, just the boards. To protect my piece, I'm going to be sealing it with Jolie's varnish in the low luster sheen. It also comes in gloss, and I'm going to be applying it with that same Jolie synthetic brush that I used all my paint for. This is a clear acrylic top coat, so it's milky white, but it dries down nice and flat, and there is no yellowing. This was also a beautiful choice to seal this raw wood. It absorbed really well into the wood, and it was very easy to put on, and the brush strokes completely leveled out. This top coat has a pretty pretty long dry time. It is 4 to 6 hours. So after my first coat was dry, I came back in with that fine sanding pad again, and I'm just giving it a light sanding before I go in with that second coat. Okay, this was a long one, but it is so worth it. Remember, here is what we started out with, this dated table, and here it is now with a brand new life, a beautiful two-tone finish, and it really brightens up this dining room. And the update on this table is that Maggie still has this in her home today. We actually did a full dining room makeover a year or so after we did this table for her. And it is so funny to see my husband do all the power tools and cutting and physical labor. And then I just come in and paint. Like, now I feel super comfortable doing both. So it's really funny looking back on that. The first thing we did was measure the space. I decided I wanted our feature to be flush with the mantle versus going all the way to the wall. For our trim, we're just using 1x3 common board. You can use whatever size you want, but this is the one that we picked out. To attach these to the wall, he's using a level just to make sure they're straight up and down. Once we got these borders up and secured to the wall, we were able to measure in between to get the perfect measurements for our tongue and groove boards. This was easier too, just to cut all the boards at once, make a pile, and then bring them in together before we applied them to the wall. To get these up on the wall, he's using a level just to make sure everything is straight again, and then using that nail gun and securing them to the wall in the spots that we marked where the studs are. You are putting this up, you do want to make sure that you have an even amount of boards. So if there is one board that you have to cut, you want to split that difference between your top board and your bottom board. There will be a little gap between your last board and the mantle, but don't worry about that because you're going to use caulk to fill that up and make it seamless later. The first thing that I need to do is fill up all the nail holes that we created. I'm using this DAP plastic wood filler today. I really like using these tubes because I just find it's less messy. You can just squeeze the little amount you need right over the little holes, and then you go back with your putty knife and smooth that over. I'm using 150, and I'm just going to wrap that around a sanding block and sand everything down by hand, just making it smooth and making sure that nothing is sticking up. I really want to make sure that that blends in with the wood. Again, I'm painting with Jolie paint, and I selected Palace White for this. Painting with my Jolie signature brush today. This is the small one, and I'm going to be doing the basic finish today. So I'm just getting a good amount of paint on my paintbrush, and I'm just going to start going in every direction. Not making like really crazy brush strokes, but not worrying about making a smooth finish. I also wanted that wood grain and those knots to come through for that rustic farmhouse look. If you don't want to see those as much, I do recommend priming this entire thing before you paint it, and priming it with a shellac based primer that is going to help hide those knots and seal those knots. Before I paint my second coat, I'm actually going to put some caulk on the sides in between the trim and the shiplap. And here I am just putting that in a gun and then going down and making a little strip in between where my trim and my shiplap meet. And then I'm going to go back in with that tool and just push it in there so that fills in like those gaps that I had. So this caulk is ready to paint after 30 minutes. So I'm just applying my second coat of paint onto my boards. And then I did decide to do a third coat. This is completely up to you, the amount of coverage that you want. Once I am done with that third coat, I'm going to go ahead and remove my protective painter's tape that I have on and my drop cloth and everything as I prepare to do the rest of the caulking. I'm just going to fill any gaps that you see just to make it look like one seamless piece. So I'm just going to fill along the mantle here and then smooth that out with a wet rag. And then I'm also going to do that between the trim and the wall. And that is actually my last step because I am not going to seal this. You could seal this with wax if you wanted to, but I like the chalky matte finish that this paint gives, and I'm not going to be setting stuff on top of it, so it really doesn't need that protective coat on top of there. So just to remind you what I started off with, here is my fireplace before, and here it is now with shiplap and Jolie paint. You guys, I really love this. I am so glad that we did this project. It really wasn't as hard as I thought it was going to be, and I think anybody can do this. This has really just pull the fireplace together and make it fit better with my decorating style. The fireplace is still the same, but the decor around it has changed a lot. This definitely pulls a lot more farmhouse than the style in my home is. So I have been looking at it for a while and thinking, I really want to make this over, but I'm not quite sure what I want to do yet. So I think you'll see that coming later in the year. As you can see, those knots really have come out. This is what happens when you don't seal pine and you paint directly on top of it. This was the look that I was going for, but it is very rustic and farmhouse for where my house is right now. So this will definitely be tackled in the future. Before we even jump into painting or sanding or anything, is give your piece a good scrubbing. You shake it, you want to open the lid and stir it really well using a stir stick and moving the paint around and getting all that stuff up from the bottom. Important thing to know is your first coat is not going to cover the wood completely. So if you see some wood still peeking through after that first coat dries, that is totally normal. The second coat's going to cover it up. I'm really happy with the way my first coat is looking. I don't have any drip marks or big streaks, so I am not going to sand in between coats, but if you did have any imperfections, this is the point where you could take a very fine sandpaper and just smooth down this coat a little bit. I did decide to smooth out the top with some sandpaper. Getting the top of a desk or a table or a dresser smooth is usually the hardest part of a project. So a little cheat thing that you can do is get a roller to actually roll out the top. Just make sure you get one that's for smooth application. Now, I definitely don't recommend rolling your whole piece. Rollers soak up a lot of paint and it is gonna waste a lot of paint if you roll the entire piece. And the brush really does do the job on the smaller sections. It's just sometime on the top, it can be a little tricky to get everything smooth. So I think a roller is a quick cheat way to get a smooth finish on the top. Now that my final coat has been dry for 20 minutes or more, I am going to seal my piece. So I'm just gonna get a little bit of wax on my wax brush and I'm gonna work in manageable sections about 2 to 3 square feet at a time. And I'm just gonna go back and forth with the finishing wax, working it into the paint. And you're gonna take your lint-free cloth, applying medium pressure, and you're gonna wipe it back and forth in that same direction you put your wax on. If your cloth gets all clogged up with wax, you just wanna move to a different clean area of the cloth. So you might need several cloths to do the whole piece. I let this sit in my son's room for a couple of weeks, and then I actually added the hardware back on. Just to remind you, here is what we started out with my dumpster dive desk, and here it is made over with Jolie paint. I still have this desk in my home. My older son switched desks with my son a few months ago when we created this shelf from a hutch that I had recently made over, and so they just looked better together. So it's now in my younger son's room. Pretty messy all the time, but this has held up really well for being in 2 kids' rooms, and I got it for free off the side of the road, so I still really love this project. That was so fun looking back at all those projects and seeing how I've grown myself as an artist and a DIYer, and I hold such a soft spot in my heart for Jolie. They were one of the first companies to reach out and want to partner with me and see value in my channel and my content here. And I haven't worked with them in a long time, but everybody that I touched base with there was always so kind and so fun to work with. So I just wish them all the best in wherever all those people are going in the future. If you want any more information on these specific projects, I'll link the full videos down in the description box. And I'm also going to try to piece together some alternatives that you can use to these paints in these projects for you there as well. Thanks for being here, and I will see you in my next video.